Leaks introduces this AI-rendered voice generated from an essay written by Professor Robert Gordon, former personal secretary to, and the first Western person designated as a Brahmachari, and deerskin carrier, by Maharishi. These skin boys, as they were called in the TM movement, were close confidants of Maharishi, who saw the inner workings of Maharishi's inner circle. Robert has a PhD from Princeton University. He has held posts at the Universities of California, New Mexico, and Oregon, with a specialty in American religious history. The Saga of Sexy Sadie. By Gordon-McCutchan. Part 1, The Saga of Sexy Sadie, the Beatles, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and the divorce from India's spiritual wisdom. One of the most important happenings of the 60s was the advent of the spiritual wisdom of India, through the arrival of the many gurus, rishis, and swamis who brought these teachings to the West. The most well-known of these was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, whose person, teachings, and practice were to have a profoundly positive effect on the Beatles, and through their influence on millions more around the world. But there is a darker and much more negative story too, the story of why the Beatles broke with Maharishi and left his ashram in furious disillusionment. It began when the Beatles joined Maharishi at his ashram located on a cliff above the Ganges in the Himalayan uplands near the ancient pilgrimage town of Rishikesh. It ended when they filed out in disillusioned disgust. There are 3 indispensable books on this subject: Richard Blakely's Secret of the Mantras, a warm and engaging account of what it was like to be in Rishikesh with the Beatles; Judith Bork's Robes of Silk, Feet of Clay, a detailed story of her 2-year affair with Maharishi; and Susan Shumsky's Inner Light, How India Influenced the Beatles, a scholarly exploration of the wide literature and personal memories concerning the Beatles and Maharishi. All 3 authors are well known to me and have been my close companions in writing this saga of Sexy Sadie. It complements what they have to say with my own direct experience, during my own years with the Beatles, master. Taken together, the 4 of us have decades of direct experience with Maharishi and his Transcendental Meditation, TM, movement. I trust this gives us sufficient street cred, and the right, possibly even the duty, me too a given, to speak whereof we know. The latest and most comprehensive of these 3 guides is Dr. Shumsky's Inner Light. She provides not only an introductory course in the spiritual wisdom of India, but also brief biographies of the various masters who brought these teachings to the West. She then explicates how the spiritual teachings of Maharishi, the Beatles' chosen master, suffused many of their songs. She plumbs, with great specificity and insight, the deep spiritual message of the lyrics. In addition, she provides the facts concerning each song, that is, its inspiration, who wrote it, when, where it was recorded, and so on. She does this in entertaining fashion, including many interesting stories that took place in the creation of each song. Into the bargain, she includes how Indian instruments and tonal structures began to pervade their work. She makes clear that the Beatles' time at the Rishikesh ashram was one of the most fruitful periods in their musical lives. With the foregoing sunnier task accomplished, Dr. Shumsky undertakes a searching exploration of the biographical and historical events that unfolded in the Beatles' eventual divorce from Maharishi. These events, of course, reached their explosive crescendo when the Beatles left Maharishi's ashram in angry dismay. While it is true that Rishikesh benefited the Fab Four both personally and musically, the darker story is why they bailed on the guru they had supposed to be the perfect master. Here is the full dish. It all went down like this. Soon after their painful departure from Rishikesh and return to London, it became widely reported in the press that the Beatles left India because he attempted to seduce Mia Farrow, and possibly another American girl as well, thereby exposing his unmasterful feet of clay. Rather than a lifelong celibate master detached from the attractions of the flesh, the press claimed he had turned out to be just an all-too-human old guy on the make. The truth or falsity of these press accounts has since been the subject of heated debate. Maharishi's true believers dismiss it as scurrilous nonsense. Those who believe it say look at the evidence. Whom to believe? Why did the Beatles break with Maharishi, angrily leaving his Indian ashram and denouncing the guru they had supposed to be the perfect master. Part 2, The Volcanic Eruption, the Beatles' dramatic break with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Why did the Beatles break with Maharishi, angrily leaving his Indian ashram and denouncing the guru they had supposed to be the perfect master? La pistola fumar, smoking gun, as the Spanish have it, at least musically speaking, is the song Sexy Sadie on the White Album. The message of the lyrics: beware of the perils of flinging yourself wholeheartedly at the feet of someone you think has gotten spiritually to where you hope to get yourself. The song is Lennon's bitter musical statement of the reasons behind the final dramatic scene in Rishikesh, as the remaining Beatles, John and George, Ringo and Paul, had left earlier for unrelated reasons, and several other key players in the drama filed past a glum and despondent Maharishi as he watched them angrily march out of the ashram to the taxis waiting to take them to New Delhi. What caused this dramatic scene? The evidence makes clear that it was indeed because John and George had painfully found out that their supposedly perfect and celibate master was hitting on and getting it on with the chicks, an old and tawdry story that unfolded numerous times when many of the masters from India that came west teaching Hindu spirituality were exposed as having the self-same feet of clay. In his memoir Lennon Remembers, John makes clear that he wrote Sexy Sadie about Maharishi. As he sat seething with anger and disillusionment waiting for the taxis, he penned the first version of the song. It's pretty shocking and captures the depth of his bitterness. Maharishi, you little twat. Who the fuck do you think you are? Who the fuck do you think you are? Oh, you cunt. It's very cosmic, or at least interesting, that John, in this first cut, denounces Maharishi with terms denoting the very thing the master was on the prowl for. When George saw these lyrics, he told John they were ridiculous, that they had to be toned down. John had to admit those lyrics weren't really record ready, and came up with a second cut. Maharishi, what have you done? You've made a fool of everyone. When George objected that this was still too obvious, that they should substitute Sexy Sadie for the Maharishi, John admits he copped out and gave in to George's proposed substitution. Thus, was born the song in its present form. The first seismic tremor of the coming volcanic eruption hit on Mia Farrow's birthday, February 9, 1968. The afternoon of that fateful day, Maharishi arranged a birthday celebration for Farrow. He gave her the full celebrity treatment, as he was wont to do for all the famous and/or wealthy from whom he hoped to extract money or gain publicity. When some of the inner circle balked at Maharishi's fawning over Mia, he replied, "An international star like Mia can bring us good publicity. We must treat her special." And so he did throughout her time at the ashram. At her birthday celebration, Maharishi placed a silver crown on her head, cake and fireworks followed, and then all the course participants filed by her seated majesty, sort of kowtowed, and then presented her with trinkets purchased locally for the purpose by Maharishi's staff. Farrow later confessed to her confidants that she hated the whole thing, and that chintzy crown. Afterwards, Maharishi invited Mia to his house to celebrate her birthday with a special puja, a Hindu blessing rite. When she arrived, he led her to the basement where he had a shrine room. After he performed the puja, he turned to her and began to stroke her hair, and then, as she later recounted in an interview, "Suddenly I became aware of two surprisingly male, hairy arms going around me." She panicked and fled the basement. Part 3, When Truth Unravels, Mia Farrow's account of Maharishi's advances and the fallout at the ashram. Maharishi invited Mia to his house to celebrate her birthday with a special puja, a Hindu blessing rite. When she arrived, he led her to the basement where he had a shrine room. After he performed the puja, he turned to her and began to stroke her hair, and then, as she later recounted in an interview, "Suddenly I became aware of two surprisingly male, hairy arms going around me." She panicked and fled the basement. Shortly after fleeing Maharishi's grasp, Farrow gathered with some of her close ashram friends, among them Nancy Jackson, a wealthy socialite and one of Maharishi's most ardent believers. She told them Maharishi had grabbed her and made clear he wanted to have sex. Visibly shocked by Mia's accusation, Jackson asked Farrow how she could even think, much less say such a thing. Farrow heatedly riposted, "Look, I'm no fucking dumbbell, I know a pass when I see one. Listen, I know a pass from a puja." At this same gathering, she also confided to her friend Avi Kohli, her travel guide, what had happened. Knowing that he planned a trip to Kathmandu and Goa the following morning, she said, "When you leave tomorrow, I'm going with you. That is final." Raising a glass of champagne, she then said, "To the last night in this holy place." Ha! That's a laugh. Maharishi's no saint. He made a pass at me when I was over at his house before dinner. Further evidence that the above account is true comes from Ned Wynn, one of my two best lifelong friends. He provides us with another piece of damning evidence concerning what went on in Maharishi's basement. Ned was the grandson of the comedian Ed Wynn, a star of early American cinema. Ned's father was Keenan Wynn, a well-known character actor from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Ned grew up in the heady atmosphere of the then reigning Hollywood stars. He told me he got his first erection at 5 years old when, during a party at his parents' house, Ava Gardner dandled him on her knee, and was a childhood friend of Mia Farrow. It was he who first got her interested in transcendental meditation. Thus, when she returned in a huff from Rishikesh, she sought out her old friend to tell him what had gone down to make her leave the ashram. Ned was obviously eager to hear her out since by now the story of the Beatles' angry departure from India had become tabloid fodder. When Mia told Ned the tawdry story, he, a true believer, expressed great skepticism, asserting that she must have misunderstood Maharishi's intentions. She insisted, as Wynn recounts in his memoir We Will Always Live in Beverly Hills, that Maharishi clearly wanted her to lie down and have sex with him. When Ned further expressed doubt, he tells us, "The former Mrs. Frank Sinatra turns to me, Ned, she says with great patience, 'Don't you think I know when a man wants to fuck me?'